Thank you, Georgia. My name's Alex. I had a whole intro sort of worked out, but obviously that's what Georgia does. I'll be speaking about email security and some of the more human elements of email security. Everyone is probably very familiar with email. It's probably one of the first pieces of the internet that most business people have come across. And it has been around for a long time. It's a decentralized protocol. It's very flexible. It was invented at a time that when the internet was young and there wasn't a lot of commercial interest in the internet at the time. So I would say that we'll probably never get anything like email again as a decentralized protocol that everyone agrees to use. Most of the other email killers that you've seen around the place have always suffered from having commercial interest involved, and they're always based on using a specific system. But it has its weaknesses. It wasn't designed to be secure, and security really relied on the trust and honor system, especially around authenticating the sender who was actually sending the emails. Email is quite a funny protocol in that it's very similar to your standard letter that you would have sent through the snail mail, in that there is this concept of an envelope which has a whole lot of information that the post office box will use to route the email to where it needs to go, and it has the actual message itself, which is inside the email, and that letter will have a from address on it as well. So there's this concept of two from addresses, which has caused a whole lot of issues around spam and spoofing out there on the internet. Email is a multi-layered protocol, but I'm only really going to be talking about the human elements and what things you can actually do today to actually protect those human elements. So there's a couple of buzzwords, I'm sorry to use them, but the email account compromise, EAC, is an account compromise that occurs usually from phishing of some kind. If those are not familiar with the term phishing, it's more of a throw the net type concept where you're trying to get people to click on links and ask for usernames and passwords and get access to it. Spear phishing is becoming more and more of an issue, and that is where attackers are finding out additional information about that corporation before they throw out phishing emails, where they're able to see what vendors that person uses, what email systems they use, make the notifications look like the notifications that the user actually uses. And just speaking a little bit about COVID, which has just recently happened, about working in a different security context. Research showed that users that are working in a different security context can have a different security awareness. When you get an email on your phone, you can be more susceptible to sort of listening to it or getting sucked into what it might be saying. I'm sure some of you might have received spam from a text message of some kind, and that can lead you to be quite raise security concerns, but maybe even be sucked into thinking that it's a legitimate message or not. The industry has sort of really came about, and the answer to a lot of these questions is user training, which colleagues of mine have talked about. And it still will be one of the main defences, because email is a protocol that's based on words and essentially social interaction at its core. So there's always ways of manipulating that social engineering for good purposes as well as for evil purposes. A lot of us are moving to Office 365, which is certainly a good. It's good in a number of ways, really. It's made security around email a little bit easier to acquire, especially around the compromised accounts issue, in that we're able to now implement two-factor authentication is more readily available. But it does come with some downsides in that there is a more homogeneous look and feel, and that security professionals need to be aware of, in that notifications or websites are easily sort of forged to look like Office 365 and can suck users in. So again, that training aspect is key in order for users to actually understand how that is used in context. I will share a joke I sort of saw today on email. I'll shake my magic 8-ball and see if I can find a better email service, and it always comes up, Outlook is good. But there is another aspect to email compromise, phishing emails, and that is companies can, or attackers, can pretend to be your actual domain, where they're actually pretending to be you. This can come in other forms. There is things like display name spoofing, as well as like putting your domain name very similarly. But even looking at most business domains today, most business domains are not protected enough so that attackers can easily sort of spoof those domains. And this can come in a number of forms. CEO, CTO fraud, so pretending to be those VIPs within the organization. Also, your vendors that you deal with, your partners, are they using protected domains? Because you may be receiving invoices from them which could be false information using a false domain. Those, through a spear phishing campaign, attackers can find out that information quite easily. So I got a stat from the FBI actually, that losses to business email conference, BEC, sorry to use these acronyms, but yeah, accounted for 26 billion last year worldwide, US, and Gartner is certainly predicting that these kinds of attacks using phishing and domain spoofing will double each year. So there are a couple of simple things you can use to protect your domain. Easy things that have the industry has usually come out with: color coding internal emails, or vice versa, color coding external emails. So users get a bit of an extra context about what emails they're actually using. And also speaking to what others have been talking about, and also the question that came up around being able to provide more information for the user and to actually make a more informed choice. The user can only detect suspicion. Well, I'll bring it back a bit. Users are actually quite good at detecting spam emails. They know if it's a suspect, but sometimes they don't have enough information at their fingertips to actually make that informed decision. So giving them access to information such as whether that sender was validated or not, whether it's a signed email, which I'll come to in a sec, I think is an important aspect that can help with improving user training. Having a payment verification service, any kind of invoicing or anything like that should have a secondary step to call someone maybe through the phone system in order to account for that. But it does bring to my main point on this talk being the use of DMARC within organisations. Ratified in 2015, it's really the only protocol that's really there to protect your domain identity, so that people cannot pretend to be your internal employees when interacting with not only your domain itself, but the outside world, which you may completely be unaware of. So DMARC stands for Domain-Based Message Authentication Reporting and Conformance. And the key emphasis there probably being on that reporting aspect, really gaining that insight into how your domain, your emails are used outside of your own organisation, as well as obviously inside. And just to give you some stats here, which were compiled by SMX for last year, 66% of the top 100 New Zealand companies do not have a DMARC record. And 80% of New Zealand government's agencies do not have a DMARC record either. So this kind of, the fact that your domain is protected or not is quite a public knowledge. It's easily seen whether your domain credentials can be protected or not. So I would sort of add that it leads to easy ways of knowing how well it's sort of being rolled out. And I wanted to include a little exercise here just to show you some of the vulnerabilities around email and how it works. If I could just get some colleagues of mine to come up. I'm sorry, I don't have a lapel mic, so I might have to keep coming back to the lectern here. So we'll give Jevon here, looks certainly suspicious, so he'll definitely be the pirate in this exercise. And Georgia's certainly, she's definitely trustworthy. So I'll be the recipient here in these emails. I'll also be the DNS server that's providing that authentication. So to give you an idea about sender validation, it all started in 2003 with the SPF protocol. This is quite a simple protocol in that we're really only trying to identify the IP addresses that are actually sending emails. It's very easy to understand. It's well understood. Most companies would have generated an SPF protocol in the last 5 years or so, or 10 years. But it doesn't completely protect your domain. It's quite vulnerable, and I'll just show that with an exercise here. So I'll give Georgia a email that she's going to send to me, being goodcompany.com, and if you could just pass me the email, that's it. Very easy. I had to make it an easy exercise, and it's changed a little bit over the years. And so there's the concept of an envelope here, and the envelope says from goodcompany.com. And inside the email, it also has a from as well, which says from goodcompany.com. And that's a classic example of a good SPF authenticated email. But it's pretty vulnerable, is what we'll see. Wrong one. And we'll give bad email. So he's imnotaspammer.com, and can't be. So me as the DNS server as well will do a lookup on imnotaspammer.com, and it is a valid sender for Jevon. Jevon is definitely a sender for that. But in the envelope, and that is the SPF is always against the envelope. But the from domain in the message, which is the message that the user sees at the end, says from goodcompany.com, and there's no extra validation from that. So SPF is quite vulnerable to spoofing attacks by itself. We'll move on to, oops, wrong button. So we have another protocol called DKIM, which provides a little bit extra protection, and DKIM actually sits with the message itself. It's a signing protocol, so there's a key that actually signs the email within the message, and I'll pass this to good person Georgia, who will just pass it back. And just got to keep the exercises simple. And I could also do an SPF thing, and it is from goodcompany.com, but quite specifically, it's signed by goodcompany.com, and it is from goodcompany.com. So it is expected to be, that's certainly a good example of a good email. But if a spammer was to do the same thing with DKIM by itself, and so again, it's from I'm a spammer, and I'll do the SPF check. But more interestingly, and which talks to one of the key vulnerabilities with just DKIM by itself, is that it can be signed by anyone. So it was signed by I'm not a spammer as well. And again, it still says from goodcompany.com. So by itself, it is not really sufficient. So moving on to DMARC really provides that extra key link between the from domain that's in the message itself and the rest of the other things such as SPF authentication and DKIM. So we'll do that example again, and then I'll talk a little bit about DMARC. Again, so I can do an SPF lookup, and I'm not a spammer is not the same as goodcompany.com. And also the sign by domain is also not the same as goodcompany.com, and that's a clear DMARC failure, so I would have rejected that email. So I would have been receiving good emails from who I expect, Georgia, and rejecting emails from Jevon. And so, yeah, one of the key strengths is that it connects those key verification information, the from addresses, and makes it possible to actually properly protect your domain. There is also a clear, concise sending policy, so you're saying to the outside world whether emails will be rejected or not. You're telling them what you want them to do if the sender validation fails. So this usually starts with a none policy and then moves to a quarantine or reject. There is reporting that is included in here, so this is probably one of the key aspects, and that's why DMARC should be implemented really universally, and it gives you so much more insight into how your mail is being used on the internet outside of your infrastructure. You might have a good knowledge about what emails you're receiving and what emails you're sending, but you have no idea about how your domain's being used in completely outside of your infrastructure. And there's no real weaknesses, so as I say, like most people do it. So most talks around this subject would usually end there, and also most implementations in companies would usually end there. And that's really only half the choice. We really have to move that up to a step 2 that has to kick in, and that's to analyse those reports and look for holes in those reports and how they can be filled, and then complying with the various with SPF or DKIM depending. And you may need help around this, so it's all right to sort of ask for help. And then finally, sort of bringing that policy, which I talked about, to a reject policy so that it is a protected domain. And once again, that's a public record, so you can easily see that a various domain happens to be protected or not. Okay. Thank you.